The storm hadn't hit yet, but the sky promised it would. Heavy clouds dragged themselves over the Colorado peaks like curtains ready to fall. A fire crackled inside, casting gold across the stone walls and dark wooden beams of the estate I'd built with my own hands. Well, with the proceeds of a company no one in my family even knew existed. It was Thanksgiving morning. 35 guests would be arriving in under an hour. But I was already dressed, already waiting, already watching. That's when the first car pulled up. Not Uncle Steven's rental. Not Aunt Carol's minivan. No. It was a beat-up silver sedan that didn't belong in my driveway. The kind of car you'd expect to see idling outside a rundown supermarket, not climbing toward a $6 million mountain sanctuary. I walked to the window slowly, heart pounding. The door opened. A woman stepped out, scarf fluttering in the wind, a rolling suitcase dragging behind her. For a second, I didn't recognize her. Because it was my mother. I hadn't invited her. The phone call, the text, the cold brush off, "We're only having your sister's family this year," had been the final cut in a lifetime of quiet wounds. And now she was here. Alone. Before I tell you what happened next, I need to take you back. Back to the beginning of the story, the moment everything started to unravel. When people ask about my family, I don't lie. I just simplify. It's complicated, I usually say. But the truth? The truth is that my parents, let's call them Judith and Malcolm, were obsessed with the appearance of success. And my older sister, Vanessa? She was their masterpiece. She had that kind of beauty that made people pause, thick blonde hair, soft eyes, and a voice that always sounded like it was about to laugh. She also had the grades, the medals, the charm. I, on the other hand, had curiosity, late nights coding on an old laptop, and the sort of awkward energy people mistake for arrogance. There's a memory burned into me like frostbite. I was 12, standing on a school auditorium stage, holding a second-place science fair ribbon. Behind me, my parents were on the phone, loudly bragging to someone about how Vanessa had made varsity cheer. I was still in earshot when my mom said, "Isn't she incredible? A sophomore on varsity." I was right there, ribbon in hand. And they didn't even glance up. It was like that every year. The wins I clawed for? Barely noticed. When I got into Stanford, my mother's first reaction wasn't pride. It was concern. "Isn't that far away?" My father added, "If that's what you really want." They never visited. Not once. For years of my life passed while they posted beach selfies with Vanessa's in-laws, sipping wine in Napa and posing in matching polos. I tried not to care. Really, I did. I threw myself into work, lived off noodles, and taught myself how to pitch an idea in a room full of people who thought I didn't belong. I launched my first startup before I turned 26. It flopped hard. And when I called my dad for advice, just for advice, he said, "You're not cut out for this. Be practical, like Vanessa." That was the day I stopped calling. But there was one person who never made me feel like I had to win their love. Grandma Rose. She was my compass. Quiet, thoughtful, and razor-sharp beneath her silk scarves and pearl earrings. She never compared me to Vanessa. She'd call every Sunday just to ask how I was, really. I remember her telling me once, after I vented about how overlooked I felt, "One day, sweetheart, you'll build something no one can ignore. And when they see it, they'll realize they missed the whole damn show." She was right. What I built wasn't just a business. It was an empire hidden in plain sight. My cybersecurity firm had started as a whisper, just me, a co-founder, and a dream in a tiny shared office. But over 6 relentless years, it grew into something monstrous. Government contracts. Corporate takeovers. When we finally sold it, I walked away with a figure that still doesn't feel real, $320 million. I bought the estate the next day. 50 acres of alpine silence, 6 bedrooms, cathedral ceilings, a private chef on call, and a view that looked like it had been carved by the gods. I didn't tell a soul. Not even Grandma Rose. It felt like a secret I'd earned. A version of my life untouched by their judgment. Then came that text. No greeting. No explanation. Just, "We're only having your sister's family this year." 10 words. Short. Cold. Efficient. They didn't know they'd just triggered something in me that had been waiting for years. It wasn't rage, not the sharp, hot kind. It was deeper, like a fault line shifting after decades of pressure. I read the message again, then typed back. Have a good time. That was it. Then I set the phone down, turned to the snow outside my window, and whispered to myself. This year, I make the guest list. The next morning, the world outside was cloaked in the first real snow of the season. Heavy, pristine. I stood on the deck with a cup of black coffee and opened my laptop. One by one, I called everyone they'd left out. My aunts. My uncles. My cousins. Judith said they're keeping it small this year, Aunt Carol told me. Well, I said softly, guess that means you're available. By mid-afternoon, I'd secured 35 guests. Flights arranged. Chauffeurs booked. Marco, the Denver chef I'd hired, texted me the finalized menu: herb-roasted turkey, truffle mashed potatoes, wild mushroom stuffing. I even hired a photographer. I wanted this to be a day no one forgot. By nightfall, the estate had come alive. Staff bustled from room to room, setting candles, polishing glass. I placed personal gifts in every guest room. Thoughtful things. Aunt Linda's favorite poetry book. A bracelet my cousin had posted about years ago. Fly rods for the uncles who used to take me fishing while my parents bragged about Vanessa's piano recitals. It wasn't revenge. It was a reclamation. I didn't want to hurt anyone. I just wanted to feel like I belonged. And for the first time, I was the one choosing who did. She stood there like she belonged, like the cold hadn't frozen our history between us. A beige wool coat buttoned to the throat, lips pursed, a suitcase trailing behind her in the snow like some kind of peace offering. My mother, Judith, the woman who had erased me with a 10-word text. Behind her, the taxi idled, breath fogging out from its tailpipe. The driver had already retrieved her luggage, 2 large cases and 1 smaller one, the kind people bring when they plan to stay a while. I hadn't moved. I was still standing behind the tall windows, coffee cooling in my hand, disbelief wrapped tight around my spine. Judith turned to the house and took 1 slow step forward. I blinked. Then came the second car. It pulled up just behind the taxi, tires crunching over fresh snow. A sleek black rental with tinted windows, so dark I couldn't see who was inside until the door opened. Out stepped Malcolm, my father, and behind him, another figure emerged. Long hair tucked under a designer beanie, a coat far too fashionable for these mountains. Vanessa, all 3 of them, my entire family. The trio who had boxed me out, written me off, who hadn't even asked if I had plans this Thanksgiving. Now they were here. My heart didn't race. It slowed. I placed my mug on the table beside me, walked to the door, and stepped outside into the cold. Hello, Nora, my mother said, voice careful, light. You look, well. I am well, I said. What are you doing here? Judith looked down, then back up. We saw the pictures. The ones Aunt Carol posted, Vanessa added quickly, cheeks pink with either guilt or the cold. And we realized, Malcolm cut in, that maybe we misjudged the situation. Thought it might be good to talk. As a family. The audacity almost made me laugh. So you just drove to the middle of nowhere, Colorado, uninvited? Silence. I crossed my arms. Behind me, I could hear laughter and music. The comforting thrum of people who actually cared. Who had shown up not for performance or appearances, but for connection. Judith looked past me, toward the front door. Is Grandma here? She is, I said. Along with 35 people you decided weren't family enough for your little dinner. Nora, Vanessa started, but I cut her off. You could have called. You could have written. You didn't. So don't pretend this is a spontaneous moment of reflection. We made a mistake, Judith said, and her voice cracked, just barely. We were wrong. And there it was. Not an apology. Just a sentence. But it hit like a dropped glass on stone. I stared at them. Vanessa looked uncomfortable, like someone stuck in a dress rehearsal for a role she didn't audition for. My father stood behind them both, saying nothing, shoulders stiff like he was bracing for a cold front. I stepped aside. Come in then, I said, because something in me wanted to see this through. But no, this isn't a stage for you to reclaim. It's my home. Your guests. Nothing more. They walked past me, and I didn't miss the awe in their eyes as they stepped inside. The vaulted ceilings. The stone fireplace. The view of snow-covered peaks beyond the glass. They didn't speak. Couldn't. The wealth of silence between us said everything. Inside, Grandma Rose saw them before I could explain. She stood, hands on her cane, and narrowed her eyes like a hawk spotting movement in the brush. Judith froze. Mom. You came after all, Grandma said, tone unreadable. Then she looked at me. Did you invite them? No. Everyone in the room grew quiet. It was like the record had skipped. Even Marco, in the kitchen, paused mid-sentence. I see, Grandma said. Then she looked back at them. Well, if you're here, then you sit. And you listen. Because Nora built this. All of it. And if you can't respect that, there's the door. My mother nodded, finally, like she understood she wasn't in charge anymore. The rest of the day was strange. Surreal. They sat at the table like mannequins dressed in apology. They smiled stiffly. Laughed in the wrong places. Malcolm complimented the wine. Judith helped pass the gravy. Vanessa barely ate. But they were watching. Taking it all in. Watching the way Aunt Carol threw her head back when she laughed. Watching how little cousins crawled under the table, laughing. Watching my friends from MIT swap stories about ramen and 20-hour code sprints. Watching me. Like they'd never actually seen me before. I gave a toast. Brief. Honest. To the people who showed up, I said, raising my glass. Who came when it mattered? Judith's eyes welled up. The photographer caught that moment too. By the end of the night, the house was still full of warmth, but it had shifted slightly. As if a ghost had passed through and taken some of the bitterness with it. Judith found me in the hallway after most guests had gone to bed. She looked smaller somehow, like the mountain air had humbled her. I didn't know, she said quietly. I didn't know what you'd done. What you'd built. You didn't want to know, I replied. I was so focused on Vanessa. I just assumed you'd be fine. That's not love, I said. That's convenience. She nodded. Can we start again? I didn't answer. Not then. I just walked back to the fire where Grandma Rose was waiting, cocoa in hand, a sly grin on her lips. I saw the look on her face, she said. It finally hit her. You don't need her anymore. I smiled. No, I really don't. Grandma leaned in. But they need you. And that more than the wealth, the success, or the estate, was the twist none of them had seen coming. I let them in. Not because I owed them anything, but because curiosity is a stronger force than anger. I wanted to see it on their faces, the awe, the disbelief, the realization that I had built something they couldn't ignore. Judith stepped inside first, pausing in the entryway, eyes wide. She tilted her head back and took in the vaulted ceilings, the massive antler chandelier, the mural-sized windows opening into mountain silence. Vanessa's breath fogged the glass as she stepped closer to the fireplace. Malcolm hung back, his eyes tracing the polished floorboards like he couldn't believe they were real. I didn't offer to take their coats. I didn't need to. From the living room, laughter continued to float like music. The kind of effortless joy they never associated with me. Grandma Rose appeared around the corner, cane tapping against the wood. She eyed the new arrivals with the cool inspection of a queen judging newcomers to her court. Well, she said dryly, the ghosts arrive before dessert. Vanessa looked away. Judith actually winced. I invited everyone else, I said, but you weren't on that list. Judith spoke first. We know. But we had to see this. See you. And yet, I replied, you didn't need an invitation to ignore me for 2 decades. That part came easy. The room had quieted. A few cousins peeked around the corner. Marco, from the kitchen, stilled mid-carve. We're not here to fight, Malcolm said. His voice was lower now. Measured. We're here to say we were wrong. And to ask if it's too late. It was a question no one had ever asked me before. Too late? I didn't answer. Instead, I led them into the dining room. It had taken me a week to perfect. Long tables draped in deep forest green linens, candles flickering down the center like fireflies. Place cards handwritten in gold ink. Every seat filled with people who mattered. Who remembered my birthday? Who had asked how I was when I left home? There was no room for them. Literally. But then I did something unexpected. I reached under the buffet and pulled out a smaller table, the kids' table we hadn't used since childhood. I set it beside the window, just barely in the glow of the others. Here, I said. There's room here. It wasn't a punishment. It was a mirror. Judith sat down first. Vanessa followed. Malcolm took the seat by the window and looked out at the darkening sky. They didn't speak much during dinner. Vanessa pushed her cranberry sauce around her plate. Judith kept looking over at the main table, where Uncle Stephen told jokes that made Grandma wheeze with laughter. I raised a glass. To chosen family, I said. The toast echoed. At the smaller table, no one raised theirs. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the sting of exclusion. I felt the power of presence, my own. Later that night, snow began to fall again. Thick, gentle flakes whispered against the windows as the fire crackled low and the last of the pie disappeared from plates. The scent of cinnamon, burnt wood, and slow-roasted turkey lingered in the air like a comfort blanket no one wanted to take off. The estate was quieter now. My guests were scattered, some asleep in the guest rooms, others curled up in conversation nooks with warm drinks and fuzzy throws. And then I saw her. Vanessa, standing alone on the back deck, wrapped in a shawl she'd found in the guest room closet. Her silhouette was backlit by the soft glow of the interior lights, casting her in hues of gold and shadow. She looked like a memory trying to find its place in the present. I hesitated for a moment, my fingers still curled around a half-empty mug. 1,000 moments ran through my head. Her laughter echoing while I sat alone at our childhood dinner table, the way she looked past me at her wedding, how she'd never defended me when our parents made me invisible. And yet, I stepped outside. The cold hit me immediately, but it was clean, honest. A kind of cold that made you aware of your heartbeat. Vanessa didn't turn. Remember when we used to build snow forts? She said softly, her breath visible in the air. Yeah, you always made me dig the tunnels. She laughed. The sound was genuine, tinged with nostalgia and regret. You always did the hard part, she said. And I always got the credit. I said nothing. I used to think being the favorite meant I was winning, she continued. But it was just pressure. Expectations. Mom and Dad never let me be anything other than perfect. You got to be real. Messy. Brave. I got to be forgotten, I replied. She turned toward me then, and her eyes were glassy. Not with snowflakes. With something rawer. I know, she whispered. I let them treat you like that. I let them believe I was the only one worth their time. I thought if I stayed perfect, they'd never turn on me. But they turned cold on you, and I stood by. I'm sorry, Nora. I really am. I didn't speak for a long time. The snow fell between us like a veil, softening everything it touched. I wanted to hate you, I said finally. For years, I told myself you were the villain. But deep down, I knew they used us both. You were the spotlight. I was the shadow. But neither of us ever had a choice. She nodded slowly. I think I started to believe the narrative too. That you were angry and selfish. That you just didn't try hard enough. But tonight, she looked back toward the house. This place. These people. It's magic. You built this. And it's full of love. Real love. She took a shaky breath. You always had that in you. I just didn't see it because I didn't want to see it. Silence settled between us, but it wasn't empty. It was healing. I'm not asking to be forgiven, she added. I just wanted you to know. I see you now. Inside, lights flickered gently. Grandma rose past the living room, glanced out the window, and gave me a slow, knowing nod. I looked back at Vanessa. I don't know if we can ever go back, I said. But maybe we don't have to. She smiled. Maybe we start from here. I offered her my mug, still warm. She took it with both hands and held it like something fragile. We stood together in silence, side by side, watching the snow pile higher on the pine branches. The past was still there, buried under years of silence and bitterness, but for the first time, it didn't feel like a wall. It felt like ground we could walk across, slowly, together. When we came back inside, the warmth hit us like a welcome. Grandma Rose was waiting in the kitchen, 2 mugs of cocoa already made. "Well?" she asked. "We talked," I said. She raised an eyebrow. "Real talk?" I nodded. "The messy kind." She smiled. "That's the only kind worth having." We sat at the kitchen table together, 3 generations of women who had all been underestimated in different ways. The fire cracked nearby. Music hummed softly from the speaker. Vanessa sipped her cocoa in silence, but the walls she always wore around me were slowly, visibly coming down. "I was thinking," Grandma said, looking around. "Next year, maybe we should make this a tradition. No politics. No perfection. Just people who show up." Vanessa looked at me, waiting for my reaction. I nodded slowly. "Only if everyone brings something to the table. Not food. Something real." Grandma grinned. "Deal." That night, I couldn't sleep. I wandered through the halls, bare feet on warm wood, letting the quiet settle in my bones. The rooms were dark and still, filled with people I loved, and a few I was still learning how to forgive. I opened the back door one more time and stepped onto the deck. The stars were brilliant. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was chasing belonging. I had built it, and it had finally come home. Christmas arrived like a held breath finally exhaled. The Colorado mountains were blanketed in thick, crystalline snow that glistened beneath a pale morning sun. My estate, my sanctuary, looked like something out of a dream. Smoke curled from the chimney. Candles flickered in the windows. The scent of pine and vanilla hung in the air. But inside me, something unfamiliar stirred. Peace. Judith, Malcolm, and Vanessa had returned. But this time, they hadn't brought expectation with them. They brought themselves. Just themselves. And I had made a choice, a bold, quiet one, to let them in again, just far enough. They arrived 3 days before Christmas, stepping out of the same black rental they'd used on Thanksgiving. I watched from the porch as they stood at the foot of the steps, staring up at the house like it was still some surreal monument to a version of me they'd never imagined. I opened the door. Judith's voice broke the silence. "Nora, it's still hard to believe you built all of this." "I didn't build it to be believed," I said. "I built it because I knew no one else would make space for me." Malcolm nodded. "We're ready to see it. All of it." And this time, I believed him. The next 3 days felt like walking through a story someone else might have written. There were no grand speeches. No dramatic apologies. Just quiet effort. Judith helped in the kitchen without giving orders. Malcolm asked questions without steering the conversation back to Vanessa. And Vanessa? She lingered. She listened. She laughed in that soft, unguarded way I hadn't heard since we were kids hiding under blankets from thunderstorms. On Christmas Eve, we sat around the fireplace, just the 5 of us, wrapped in warmth. No one talked about business, or grades, or accomplishments. We talked about memories. About that one summer road trip where our tire exploded in the middle of nowhere. About how Grandma Rose once convinced us the attic was haunted just to keep us out of it. We even played cards badly and no one kept score. That night, I gave them a tour of the house. A real one. We passed the framed magazine covers, Forbes, Wired, Business Insider. Malcolm paused in front of them, fingers tracing the edges of the glass. "You never told us," he said again. "I tried," I answered. "You weren't listening." He didn't argue. Just nodded and said, "We're listening now." In the guest rooms, I'd placed wrapped gifts on each bed. Judith opened hers first, a vintage cookbook filled with handwritten notes from Grandma Rose. Vanessa's was a bracelet made of recycled tech components, the kind she'd once said was too geeky when I wore it in college. "I was wrong," she whispered, sliding it onto her wrist. Malcolm's gift was a map. An old paper map with a single route highlighted, Boston to Colorado, traced in red ink. I'd circled the place where I'd bought my first office space and then drawn a star over the estate. "It's your trail," I said, "so you don't forget where I started." He folded it gently, like it was sacred. Christmas morning was silent and soft. I watched from the window as Vanessa stepped outside with a mug of coffee and stood in the snow without a coat, staring up at the sky. Judith made breakfast with Grandma Rose and, for once, didn't try to control the room. Malcolm chopped wood out back. I sat at the kitchen island with a bowl of fruit and realized something that startled me. I wasn't angry anymore. The pain hadn't vanished, but the sharpness had dulled. I wasn't holding my breath around them, waiting to be unseen. I was just present. Later that night, after dinner and gifts and music that made us all hum along, we gathered around the fire once more. Grandma Rose lifted her glass. To showing up, she said. Late is still better than never. I raised mine too. To building your own table. And keeping a few extra chairs open, just in case. Everyone smiled. But it was Vanessa who reached across the coffee table and took my hand. You were right, she said. Family isn't who invites you first. It's who shows up when you don't need them to. Snow fell gently outside, dusting the windows with glitter. The fire crackled. The room pulsed with something rare and real. And as I looked around the home I had built, not just with money, but with heartache and hope, I realized something else. This house didn't just belong to me anymore. It belonged to the version of me who had once eaten noodles on an old door-turned desk. To the girl who had watched her family lift someone else's name up while hers was barely whispered. To the woman who refused to stay bitter and decided, instead, to become undeniable. It belonged to everyone who showed up, not because they were invited, but because they finally saw me. I walked outside one last time before bed. The air was cold but still. Stars filled the sky like scattered truth. And I whispered into the night. I made it. And I'm not alone anymore.